Hi there, I'm Jim Zirin. Welcome back for more conversations. Lee Gelernt is with us from the National Office of the American Civil Liberties Union. Lee is one of our leading public interest lawyers. He has argued dozens of high-profile civil rights cases before the United States Supreme Court, as well as federal courts around the country. Since the inauguration of Donald Trump in January 2025, Lee and his colleagues have been consumed with cases arising out of the administration's mass deportation policies. The key cases have involved issues of due process, cruel and unusual punishments, upholding the rule of law, and even criminal contempt on the part of lawyers for the government who may have defied a court order. In March 2025, invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, never before used in peacetime, Trump, without due process, sent hundreds of Venezuelan men alleged to be gang members to the infamous CECOT prison in El Salvador, where they faced torture and abuse. Their removal from the U.S., possibly in violation of a court order, occupied Lee Gelernt night and day as he filed court papers with whip-smart precision on agonizingly short notice. After 4 months, the men were eventually returned to Venezuela. Some asylum seekers in the U.S., they're faced an uncertain fate. Lee is a civil rights titan, a bulwark of freedom, and we're honored to welcome him to the program.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Okay, now you started as an economics student in London. How did you get involved with civil rights cases?
I went to the London School of Economics, but everyone always leaves off the international relations part of, so I actually went to study international relations, but ended up in law school and never really used that education. I found it worthwhile. I still love to read about international relations, but I ended up going this route.
Okay, so now civil liberties practice, certainly since Trump's inauguration, has focused on issues of immigration. And you've handled a number of cases in that field for the Civil Liberties Union. Now we have a new director of Homeland Security. Right. We're about to have a new attorney general. Do you see the situation changing on the ground?
You know, we can hope, but I don't. I think that immigration policy has largely come from the White House. I mean, everyone says it's coming from the White House, and in particular, Stephen Miller, and I have no reason to doubt that. So I do not see it changing in any significant way. I think the policies will continue, whether there are different ways to spin it, whether the former senator is a little smoother politically and in the media than former Secretary Noem, maybe, but I think the policies will largely stay the same, and I don't see our work diminishing at all.
Okay, now one of the most disturbing things that has emerged from all this is the question of the rule of law,
right?
Obedience to court orders. So tell about the course of litigation in this area.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right to bring that up. What I'm trying to sort of get out there to people, and I think they're starting to realize, is as important as the discrete policy issues are, and there's a lot of important ones, I think what transcends all of it is the question of, are we still going to have the rule of law in this country? Which means that the executive branch and the Justice Department respect the courts. And during Trump 1, I argued a lot of high-profile cases, and there were a lot of draconian policies, in particular the family separation policy. But I never really thought that Trump 1 Justice Department would defy court orders or be disrespectful in court. What I'm seeing now is not just that they're defying court orders deliberately in our view, but there's just outright disrespect for the courts in their public comments, but also even in court, in briefs. And you've been following this for a long time. I mean, Justice Department lawyers don't walk into, and they're even in person, don't walk into court and be disrespectful, but that's what we're seeing. And I think the most notorious situation now is the Alien Enemies Act, which you mentioned in your introduction. We heard that President Trump was going to invoke this 1798 law that's only been invoked 3 times in our country's history, all during major wars, that can only be used during wars, and he was going to invoke it during peacetime against a regular criminal organization.
Why did he choose the Alien Enemies Act when there were other enforcement statutes?
Well, that's a great question, and I think it was theatric. So we're going to invoke these wartime laws, and we're going to try to eliminate all due process. But everyone knows there are plenty of laws on the book if they wanted to remove someone who actually had committed a criminal offense or was a gang member. And notably, in our case, is challenging that former high-level Republican officials of the Justice Department, spanning many, many administrations, put in a friend of the court brief saying, we would never have invoked this military law, never even thought about doing that, because there's plenty of laws on the books to remove actual criminal immigrants. And so they went ahead and invoked this. We got into court in time, at an emergency hearing on a Saturday night. The judge issued an order saying, let's slow down. We're not sending anybody to this notorious prison until we can have a full hearing. Nonetheless, the Justice Department or the administration transferred the men to El Salvador late Saturday night, early Sunday morning. The president of El Salvador tweeted, oopsie, the courts are too late. Secretary Rubio liked it. And then the Justice Department the next day filed something in court saying, oh, we didn't think the order applied because the planes had already taken off outside U.S. airspace. That was just deliberately a pretext. It's absolutely clear, and now from a whistleblower, we know for sure they deliberately violated this order. And so Judge Boasberg is rightly infuriated, saying, you may disagree with policies, but it's fundamental to this country that you cannot violate a court order. You can appeal it, but you can't violate a court order, especially if it means men ending up in a notorious prison and be tortured. So he is trying to get to the bottom of it, and the Trump Justice Department is refusing to give over all the information he wants, and they continue to appeal it. I don't know if we're going to end up in the Supreme Court, but the stakes are enormous. If the Justice Department can get away with violating court orders and deliberately doing so, I mean, then we're in a whole different world than you and I have ever known.
Well, that's called a constitutional crisis.
You know, that you're putting your finger on it. What I view as a constitutional crisis, at least my own definition, is if the Justice Department the executive branch were to say, look, the Supreme Court has issued an order, we understand that order, but we are going to violate it anyway because you, the Supreme Court, you, the courts, don't have an army to back up your orders. We haven't reached that point.
This was Andrew Jackson saying,
so,
Chief Justice Marshall has made his order, now let him enforce it. We're not really sure he said that, but he's
right.
quoted as having said that.
Right, and so some people feel like we're in just about that position because the Justice Department is so openly defying the courts, even though they're claiming they're not. You know, I sort of have defined the constitutional crisis, rightly or wrongly, as that narrow where they actually admit they're doing it. But a lot of people feel like what happened with Judge Boasberg was so deliberate and so obvious that it's effectively a constitutional crisis. Now, we'll see what ultimately happens, but at some point, Judge Boasberg has to be able to enforce his orders. Otherwise, we're in a dangerous, slippery slope.
So we know that the Justice Department took the position that because these hundreds of Venezuelan men alleged to be gang members who never had a hearing are outside the territorial jurisdiction of the United States on a plane, that the court had no power to order them returned for a hearing. And one of the high-level Justice Department officials, now a federal judge in the Third Circuit, said, F the courts, or F you to the courts, and telling his colleagues that they were going to defy the order. Now, is there anything to the position that because they were outside the territorial waters in an airplane that they couldn't be ordered back? I mean, when I went to law school, I learned that equity acts in personam. You can order someone to do something even if they're doing something outside the jurisdiction of the United States.
That's still the law. You're absolutely right. It's a complete pretext. And so what the Justice Department has said is, We are not saying, Judge Boasberg, that you couldn't act upon us once we got out of U.S. airspace, but we didn't think you intended to do. Now, anybody who reads the transcript knows that that's nonsense. But now the dilemma is they defied the order and they transferred them to El Salvador and then to Venezuela. So now the Justice Department, as Judge Boasberg predicted, is arguing, well, now at least because they're in the hands of another country, now you really don't have power. He has said that's not true because of a variety of circumstances, and I'm saying that the men never got due process, should be allowed back, or at least a remote hearing. And unbelievably, the Justice Department is admitting they didn't get due process, but still saying he has no power to act. He said, I do. They've appealed that. We're going to have to see what the Court of Appeals does and maybe the Supreme Court. But it's just an unbelievable scenario where we got into court in time, we got an order, they defied it, and now they're saying, well, it's too late, even though the only reason they're in that other country is because they defied the order.
Now, the Justice Department claimed that they were deportable aliens because they were gang members,
Right.
dangerous criminals. And they said the evidence, they said extrajudicially outside the court,
Right.
that the evidence that they were gang members was they had tattoos. That's a matter that's in dispute. But there was never a hearing where the...
Right. I'm glad you brought that up because you're exactly right. What we have said is, look, we now know who the men were. Originally, they were incommunicado and they were whisked away in the middle of the night. The men are overwhelmingly denying that they had any connection to a gang and saying, please give us a hearing so we can show it. We also know that the Justice Department, as you said, was basically relying on tattoos. Expert after expert has said, this gang doesn't have anything like a tattoo initiation or anything remotely like that. So these are men, average men, but the Justice Department rounded up all the Venezuelan men who had tattoos. Some are of the church, some are of their parents, many of them are of the Chicago Bulls, which was a big thing in Venezuela. And so the Justice Department saying they're all gang members is putting the horse before the cart, or the cart before the horse. It's just unbelievable because the Justice Department is admitting they didn't get a chance to show it. And so all Judge Boasberg is saying, and the other point that you've made is, look, if they really were gang members and had done something wrong, there are myriad laws to remove them from the country. A wartime authority is not what we use to remove ordinary immigrants, even gang members, even immigrants who have committed crimes. The immigration laws allow for that, even expeditious removal. And so that could have been done, and I think that's what the judges who have pushed back on the Justice Department have said is, and the pushback on the Trump administration has said, look, if you're claiming that you wanted to remove them from the country, then use all the laws that are for that. But what the Justice Department wanted to do, and I think the Trump administration more broadly, is have this political theater around a military law and try and eliminate all due process for these men.
Well, the other statutes all provide for a hearing, for
Right.
notice and a hearing. My daughter gave me a T-shirt that says, I love due process.
Oh, that's great.
Now, are undocumented aliens in the United States entitled to due process of law under the Constitution?
They are, and I'm glad you asked that because I think there is a lot of confusion. And the reason is, as you know, is that the Constitution in certain places refers to citizens, but where they talk about due process and equal protection of law, it uses the word persons. And the Supreme Court has long ago said that that means everyone regardless of their immigration status. And remarkably, the Justice Department took these cases, the Alien Enemies Act cases, it was at the stay posture, which I know you've done shows about, and said, these men are not entitled to that kind of due process that the ACLU is asking for. And the Supreme Court put its foot down and said they are entitled to meaningful due process. They're claiming that they are not gang members. And that's why I think the due process issue got traction across the political and ideological spectrum, is because you had all of these people, including even Joe Rogan, who are coming out and saying, look, that means they can whisk anybody away if you can just claim the person as a gang member. And so all we're asking for those people is let them have a hearing. The Trump administration will not give them a hearing and saying it's too late, they're out of the country. But again, as I said, the reason they're out of the country is because they disobeyed the order in the first place.
Well, of course, the Alien Enemies Act doesn't provide for a hearing. That was something the Supreme Court said you had to give them for the statute to be constitutional at all.
Right, and so the Supreme Court has said it has to be, they read that in, and so, you know, what was remarkable is that the first time they went to the Supreme Court said, no, they are entitled to meaningful due process. A few months later, we found that they were trying to do it again from another detention center in Texas, and this time they said, well, we're going to give you 12 hours, and that's due process. The first time around, they gave them 0. We went back to the Supreme Court and rushed there at 6:30 at night because the men were already on buses going to the airport. The Supreme Court called me at 1 in the morning and said, we're stopping these removals, then issued an opinion 7-2 saying we said they were entitled to meaningful due process. That doesn't mean 12 to 24 hours. It means genuine, meaningful due process for them to be able to get a lawyer, go into court, and really show that they're not gang members. And so that was a significant slapdown of the Trump administration on this. And we are very grateful that the Supreme Court said, look, the administration has a lot of power under the immigration laws, but this is not one of them to just remove people to a notorious prison without meaningful due process.
Now, these Venezuelans were citizens of Venezuela. Why didn't they deport them to Venezuela? Why to El Salvador and throw them in the jug in CECOT prison where they were for 4 months before they were finally released to Venezuela?
Yeah, exactly.
The whole story just doesn't add up.
I think so much of what this administration has been doing is political theater. It started during the campaign, and it's political theater, and its attempt to say, look how tough we are, and also to scare immigrants. So now what they're trying to do is get every immigrant to give up their asylum claim, to give up all their due process, because they're fearful that they also could be sent to this notorious prison. Now, they would claim Venezuela wouldn't take them back. Venezuela has been taking people back, even then was taking it. But if they couldn't take them back, then they keep them in the United States until they can send them to Venezuela. But you can't send them to basically a gulag in El Salvador. They had no connection to El Salvador. The U.S. knew what was going to happen to them in this prison. I mean, this prison has been written about by human rights groups forever. Virtually no one comes out of this prison alive.
No one alive. So let's just talk about the immigration laws. A non-resident alien comes to the border and says, I'm here not because I want to make money and not because I want a better way of life or because I'm tired and poor. They say because I'm going to be tortured or killed in my native country and I want asylum. Now that's grounds for admitting him. But they must be given an asylum hearing, isn't that right?
Exactly.
Now the Trump administration says that there are too many such claims, they can't possibly process them, so they resolve these claims by rejecting everyone who presents himself at the border, and you're bringing a lawsuit. Why don't you tell us about that?
And not only rejecting them, but not even giving them the screening in the first place. And so what we have always said is, look, if you think the border is not working properly, the process at the border, then work on a solution, streamline it, but you can't eliminate asylum. I mean, after World War II, we said we would never send people back to danger again, at least without at least screening them for persecution if they were going to be sent back in danger. And so we made that solemn promise, as the whole world did, and Congress enacted asylum laws which said, look, you have to have a hearing if you're claiming that you're going to be persecuted, and that hearing can be fairly truncated because there may be a lot of people, but you have to at least be screened. Well, President Trump came in on day 1 of his second term and issued a proclamation saying, migrants are invading this country and I'm eliminating all pathways to asylum. And so what that means is, even if you come here and present yourself lawfully at a port of entry and you say, look, I'm a Christian family and I'm coming from a country where Christians are persecuted, I have clear evidence that I've already been persecuted, you can't get screened for asylum. There is absolutely no screening. Everyone says, well, there's chaos at the border. There has to be a middle ground between no asylum and complete chaos. And that's what we're for, but there has to be some basis for asylum. And really, it's a separation of powers case. Because what President Trump is saying, I can wipe away all asylum, even though Congress has enacted these asylum laws. And so he is saying, I don't care that Congress has done it, I'm going to wipe it away. And we have brought a lawsuit, and we prevailed in the lower court in D.C. The Trump administration was furious. They appealed it to the Court of Appeals in the District of Columbia. We're waiting on a decision, and I suspect if we win, they will go to the U.S. Supreme Court and say the president has the power to eliminate all asylum. And that puts us with only a handful of countries, Iran, North Korea, that don't screen people for danger. That's a bad place for the United States to be historically, and I think anybody who looks at it and says, well, there's a lot of people at the border, needs to remember that there's a lot of people in danger, and we said the same thing in World War II. Well, we just don't have the resources, we don't think they'll assimilate. We have to be screening people. It was a solemn promise after World War II. We can't break from the rest of the world other than those few countries and not have an asylum system.
And it's another example of where the president is ignoring powers that have been rightfully assumed by the Congress.
Exactly. And so I think that's a really important point, that the Trump administration is not just sort of defying the courts and thumbing their nose at the courts, but they're also thumbing their nose at Congress. Now, Congress doesn't seem to want to act in a lot of ways, but they're basically saying, we are going to do what we want. We don't care about the courts. We don't care about Congress. And that's not the way our system works best.
Now, we've also sent non-resident aliens, immigrants who are claiming asylum, to third countries.
Right.
They say they're going to be murdered or tortured in their native countries, so we send them to South Sudan, where, for example, where the State Department says Americans shouldn't go, it's too dangerous, and State Department personnel with all their bodyguards can't go, it's too dangerous. Now, what is the law on that? Number one, can we send them to a country which is then going to send them to their native country where they're going to be tortured because they have no stricture
Right.
on doing that? Or can we send them to a country where they're going to be murdered or tortured?
No. And so there's two ways this is playing out, and you hit on both of them. One is we're going to send them to a third country, and we know that that third country is going to send them on to their home country, where there's already been an immigration judge saying they will be persecuted or tortured in their home country. Yet we try and wash our hands of it. The Trump administration tries to wash its hands of it by saying, well, we didn't send them directly to their home country. We sent them to this third country. The third country sent them on. But if the U.S. knows that that's going to happen, they're just as complicit. But even if they don't get sent to their home country, if we're sending them to dangerous places where they're going to be persecuted or tortured, that's also illegal. And what the Trump administration is saying is, well, we have agreements with those countries. I think a lot of times those agreements are not written down, but they're really not worth the paper they're written on, because we know those countries aren't safe. In the past, there were people sent to third countries, but it was used sparingly, and only after a careful assessment, this person will not be in danger if we send them to the third country. And we did that where a home country might not take the person back. But there was a careful assessment. They'll be all right in this country. That's not what's happening. We are shipping off people all over the world, as you said, including South Sudan, without any assessment or sort of a pretextual assessment that they'll be okay.
Do you have any faith, Gelernt, that the courts, notably the Supreme Court, are going to restrain the Trump administration in its immigration policies?
I do. I do.
You do?
And part of it is I couldn't do my job if I didn't have faith. But I genuinely think when we have the better of the argument, I think we will win. We've won in the lower courts. I believe we will win in the Supreme Court when we have the better of the argument. I'm not giving up. I know a lot of people are cynical about it. I am not, but I feel like that's the only way we can really do our work.
The only way you can do your work.
Right.
So, Gelernt, thank you so much for coming by. This has been absolutely wonderful.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more conversations. Don't forget to download our app so that you can hear our programs and other wonderful programs on CUNY TV when you're driving or when you're walking down the street. I'm Jim Zirin. Good luck, be well, and all the best.